Words don't just describe the world, they shape it. Some words carry centuries of history inside them, heavy with politics, empire, and power. One of those words is thug. Today, when you hear thug, you might think of gangsters, rappers, or maybe you remember politicians using it to describe protesters. But this word story doesn't begin in an American city. It begins on the dusty roads in colonial India, where the British used it to brand entire communities as dangerous outsiders. From there, it crossed the oceans, taking on new meanings in the streets of London and New York, in Hollywood, crime films, in the civil rights struggle of the 1960s, and later in the lyrics of Tupac Shakur. It's a word that has never been neutral. From the start, it has been used to draw a line between those who belong and those who are criminal, between those in power and those deemed dangerous. In this video essay, we're going to trace the long history of the word thug, how it was born in the crucible of colonial India, reshaped by race and politics in the United States, reclaimed in hip hop, and remains fiercely contested today. And as we go, I want you to keep one question in mind. What does it really mean to live the thug life? Hi, you're in class with Dr. T. The word thug comes from Hindi in Urdu, meaning deceiver or swindler. Its deep roots trace back to Sanskrit, meaning to cover, to conceal. From the beginning, it described not just violence, but deception, a kind of hidden danger. In the early 19th century, British officials in India began to use the word thuggy to describe groups accused of befriending travelers on the road, then robbing and strangling them with cloths or cords. These groups were said to travel in bands, pose as fellow pilgrims and merchants, and then turn violent once trust was established. Colonial officials claimed that these so-called thugs were often more than ordinary bandits. They were supposedly members of a secret religious cult devoted to the goddess Kali, practicing ritual murder as an act of worship. British Administrator William Sleeman became famous for leading campaigns against them in the 1830s and 1840s, publishing sensational accounts that portrayed the Thuggy as a vast hereditary conspiracy that had terrorized India for centuries. But modern historians are skeptical. While robbery and banditry certainly existed, the idea of a massive organized Thuggy cult looks more like a colonial invention. By portraying these groups as an ancient menace, the British justified their expanding police powers, surveillance systems, and control over Indian society. The suppression of Thuggy became a way to showcase British rule as the savior of India from its own supposed barbarism or barbarism. Thus, when the word thug entered English, it already carried layers of meaning. Not just violent criminal, but uncivilized, dangerous outsiders. Its colonial roots mattered. It was always more than descriptive. It was a way of labeling certain people as beyond the bounds of civilization. By the late 19th century, the word had traveled from colonial India to Victorian England and across the Atlantic to the United States. In British and American newspapers, thugs were used for urban criminals, gangs, and strikebreakers. During labor disputes in the Gilded Age, you would often read about companies hiring quote-unquote thugs to beat striking workers, or on the other side, strikers being labeled thugs themselves when violence broke out. In the early Hollywood films, especially the gangster movies of the 1930s and 1940s, the quote-unquote thug was a familiar character, the nameless enforcer, the brute with the gun, the muscle for the mob boss. He was working class, unrefined, and ultimately disposable. At this point, thug carried more of a class dimension than a racial one. It was about poor men, immigrant laborers, and those who work with their fists. But by the mid-20th century, especially in America, the word would take on a new, sharper racial edge. The civil rights era transformed the word thug. In the 1950s and 1960s, as Black Americans organized for desegregation, voting rights, and an end to police brutality, the media and political leaders often described protesters, marchers, and especially those who took part in urban uprising as thugs or hooligans. Take the Watt riots or uprisings, I would like to refer to, in 1965 in Los Angeles, sparked by police violence and fueled by decades of discrimination. It was a political rebellion, but newspapers across the country described it as thuggery and lawlessness. The people rising up against injustice were cast as criminals, not citizens. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover blurred the line, further describing the Black Panthers, Malcolm X, and even Martin Luther King Jr. in language that suggested criminal menace. The idea that Black protest was inherently violent and thuggish became a way of delegitimizing an entire movement. This was part of the broader law and order backlash. As Richard Nixon and others appealed to white voters worried about urban unrest, they used words like thug as a racial code, not explicitly racist, but carrying clear racial meaning. The word became shorthand for the image of the young Black man as a threat. From this moment onward, thug in American English was no longer neutral. It became deeply tied to race, crime, and fear. In the 1990s, hip-hop culture took the word thug and gave it new life. No one embodied this more than Tupac Shakur. For Tupac, thug life wasn't about celebrating violence for its own sake. It was about survival in a society that stacked the deck against poor Black youth. To call oneself a thug in this context was to flip the insult. It was to say, yes, I live outside your definition of respectability, but I do so with resilience, pride, and defiance.
There's a bad part because the kids see that and they mimic him. That's the part I haven't figured out yet. But the positive side is the kids who live in a household where the mother is a crackhead or whatever, and he hears the rap, he's like, oh, that's an everyday thing for them. So I don't have to feel ashamed. It cuts both ways. To me, it's like, when I say I live the thug life, baby, I'm hopeless. One person might hear that and just like the way it sounds, you know what I'm saying? But I'm doing it for the kid that really lives a thug life and feels like it's hopeless. So when I say hopeless, and when I say when I say it like that, it's like I reach him. You understand? And even if when I reach him, it makes it look glorious to the guy that doesn't live that life. I mean, I can't help it, it's a fad, you know. He'll drop the thug life soon enough. But for the person that I was trying to reach, he'll pick it up and I'll be able to talk to him again. I think I'm being responsible, but it's hard. Once you start worrying about what you're saying, I get writer's block.
This adaptation turned thug into a cultural identity, spreading not only across hip-hop in the United States, but also globally. Rappers like Young Thug in the 2000s continued this tradition. But the tension remained. While hip-hop reclaimed the word, mainstream politics and media continued to weaponize it. In the 21st century, thug has become one of the most contested words in American public life. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Black survivors of the flooding in New Orleans were described as looters and thugs, while white survivors found food. The double standard was clear. In Baltimore in 2015, after Freddie Gray died in police custody, protests erupted. Media outlets called the protesters thugs. Even President Obama used the word at one point, though he later backed away from it after criticism. For many, it was a reminder that thug often functions as a stand-in for the N-word. a supposedly polite way to stigmatize black protest and black life. The same dynamics play out in sports. After the 2004 brawl between NBA players and fans known as the Malice in the Palace, commenters call players like Ron Artest and others thugs, reinforcing the stereotype of the violent black athlete. Today, the word lives in tension. For some, it still means simply violent criminal. For others, it's a deeply racialized slur. And for many in hip hop and in popular culture, it's a badge of resilience, style, and survival. The story of Thug is a story of how power marks certain people as outsiders. In India, the British used it to criminalize nomads and justify empire. In America, it became a way to paint striking workers, immigrants, and later black activists and protesters as violent threats. In hip hop, it was flipped into a badge of survival and pride. And today, it sits uneasily between those two poles. An insult in politics, a philosophy in music, a symbol with no fixed meaning. But there's one lesson here. It's this: words are never just words. They travel, they change, they get weaponized, reclaimed, fought over. They reflect the deeper struggles over power, race, class, and belonging. So when we hear thug today, we should remember it's not just about one person's behavior. It's about centuries of history, colonialism, racism, and resilience, all packed into four letters. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think of the thug life? Is it a label that should be retired? Is it something to reclaim and wear with pride? Or is it a word too poisoned by history to carry forward? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's talk about it. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to In Class with Dr. T for more explorations into the words, ideas, and history that continue to shape our world today.